Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Now we've been doing a lot of analysis on various starfighters in the Star Wars galaxy, and I find myself constantly using the TIE Fighter as an example of what not to do when it comes to ship design. And it's a real shame because while the Empire really does try to minimize cost and quality when it comes to the TIE Fighter, they actually have some of the best pilots in the galaxy. Which is why I've always seen Imperial fighter doctrine as a bit contradictory and even wasteful. If you look at the Rebel Alliance, every Imperial that defected to their side became an ace and a leader in one of the Rebel fighter squadrons. It makes me wonder what would have happened during the Galactic Civil War if the Empire had been able to field better fighters earlier on. Anyway, today we're going to look at 10 reasons why the Imperial TIE Fighter pilot was amongst the best in the galaxy. Before Wedge Antilles was Red 2 or Rogue 3, he was known as TIE SS-25, an Imperial cadet at Sky Strike Academy. Before Han Solo was a general of the Rebellion and renowned smuggler, he was Cadet 124239 at the Imperial Flight Academy on Karita. Even Luke Skywalker, before getting involved in various terrorist activities, wanted to join his local Imperial Academy, something that every young Tatooine moisture farmer dreamed of.
And if these new droids do work out, I want to transmit my application to the Academy this year.
And that was very much the mindset of most kids growing up during the Galactic Imperial era. And this was all due to how Emperor Palpatine fundamentally changed the structure of galactic society and the galactic economy. In the latter years of the Galactic Republic, Chancellor Palpatine definitely grabbed more and more power for the federal government and the executive office. Oftentimes, he used the separatist threat as a reason behind his power seizures. For instance, he secretly caused instability in the intergalactic banking clan worlds by launching a separatist invasion. This gave Palpatine an excuse to step in and assume management and control of the banking clans, which in a sense nationalized the largest banks in the galaxy. This also consequently gave Palpatine the power to print more money so he could build a larger military. With the fall of the Republic and the rise of his new empire, Palpatine began targeting the largest defense contractors in the galaxy by either nationalizing them or making deals with them. He also occupied resource-rich worlds like Lothal and Jeddah, where large quantities of rare metals like Dunium and Kyber crystals could be found. Palpatine's goal was to control the entire industrial military complex, which would ideally make things more efficient and, more importantly, much cheaper for the Empire. This usually was achieved by lowering worker pay while increasing worker production. The Empire had a huge demand for new ships, and there were plenty of refugees and impoverished people displaced by the Clone Wars desperate for work. So if a factory worker wasn't satisfied with the new conditions, there were plenty of people lining up to take their job. As pay decreased and the middle class saw their purchasing power decrease as well, it directly affected all the services and retails that depended on their paychecks.
You want to buy some death sticks?
You don't want to sell me death sticks.
Gradually, industrialist worlds like Corellia fell into disrepair as poverty grew and businesses started to fail. But Palpatine's approach was two-pronged. At the same time, he continued to increase the size of the Galactic Empire, adding more administration and security jobs to replace all the private sector jobs that were disappearing. By the time Luke Skywalker was ready to leave the farm, there were basically just two employment opportunities left for most people in the galaxy. Either work in the defense industry or try to join the Imperial Academy and hopefully make it off-world to a prestigious finishing school and become an officer. Now, Palpatine's plan was quite brilliant. He understood that a large, unemployed populace was more likely to rebel, so he expanded the very security infrastructure that was supposed to suppress the Empire citizens by hiring those potentially problematic citizens. It was a lot tougher to rebel against the system if you were actually working for the system and depended on it for a paycheck. The side effect was that there were very few job opportunities outside of the Imperial military, which is why the Imperial Academy attracted the best and brightest in the galaxy. And because the competition was so high for the limited spots in these Imperial Academies, only the strongest and smartest were accepted. That, or you had to have a family connection or a large amount of money to bribe Imperial officials. It was even harder for individuals in the Outer Rim or on former separatist worlds, where placement into Imperial academies were even more limited. Many families trained and prepared their children for acceptance into these prestigious schools from the day they were born. This meant first getting them into a good prep school on their local planet, and then helping them excel in their classes and martial training, and then eventually placing very high in civil service tests. By the time they were 16, if they were worthy, they got a chance to attend an Imperial Academy. Now, not every Imperial Academy was considered the same caliber. Usually Imperial Navy academies were considered higher quality. The Royal Academy on Coruscant was one of the hardest schools to get into in the galaxy, and its cadets usually became junior officers and were posted on the most important ships in the Imperial Navy. Other academies, like the one on Lothal, was reserved for stormtrooper training and was considered less prestigious. The new cadets weren't just trained to pilot ships, they actually had a very well-balanced curriculum. TIE fighter pilots were supposed to be terrific mechanics and engineers. They were supposed to know how to maintain their craft along with piloting it. They were oftentimes given projects to figure out how to most efficiently use or adapt Imperial technology to specific scenarios. They also took classes in military history, tactics, and leadership. Not everyone in an Imperial Naval Academy school would find themselves piloting a TIE fighter. Although the Imperial Navy required a huge amount of starfighter pilots, they needed an even larger amount of officers to crew their massive capital ships. So by the end of their training, most cadets that do become TIE fighter pilots were pretty well-rounded individuals with a wide variety of skills and knowledge. The environment in these academies was extremely ruthless and competitive. Because of the limited spots available in these academies, only the best of the best made it. On top of the constant physical and mental testing, a big emphasis was placed on winning competitions and ranking the highest in different assignments.
There is no friendship in war. The only thing that matters is victory.
The cadets that did well were oftentimes rewarded with additional training, which could further increase their advantage over other cadets. Although officially frowned upon, cadets oftentimes tried to sabotage each other. So not only did you have to be talented, you had to be smart or vicious enough to either destroy your competition or survive others trying to destroy you. It wasn't uncommon for cadets to be involved in physical altercations with each other, sometimes even leading to the death of a cadet. The demanding curriculum and competitive environment in Imperial Academy meant that a lot of cadets ended up dropping out before the course was finished. The Royal Academy on Coruscant had a 3-year cadet program with a 50% dropout rate. Further training to become a TIE fighter pilot, the most elite of the Imperial Navy, had a 90% dropout rate. And it was only because the sheer number of pilots trying out for these positions that the Empire was able to afford such a high rate of dropout. Also, individuals who dropped out weren't just executed or dropped into a Sarlacc pit, they were oftentimes reassigned to different positions. If they didn't make it through the Imperial Academy, they could still find a second life as an Imperial Army grunt, like Han Solo did after repeatedly having disciplinary issues. Others who succeeded in making it through the Imperial Academy, but not as a TIE fighter pilot, would go on to pilot other less demanding spacecraft, like the Lambda-class shuttle. Because the Empire had more than enough manpower at its disposal, it favored live fire exercises and sometimes would even put their cadets into real-life combat situations. No matter how realistic a simulation was, nothing replaces actual combat. This was a huge advantage for the cadets that actually went on these types of missions and survived. They gave them a big boost in confidence and experience. As a cadet, Han Solo's training squadron came under attack by raiders. In order to save one of his fellow cadets, Han Solo disobeyed orders and was able to take out 3 of the enemy fighters before crashing into an Imperial hangar, causing significant damage. This was just one of his latest offenses in a long line of disciplinary issues and eventually led to his court-martial and demotion to the Imperial Army Infantry. The Imperial Flight Academies had state-of-the-art technology for its students, including fully enclosed simulation pods, along with a variety of training vessels. An Imperial cadet oftentimes got more real-life flight time than a Rebel pilot would get in a simulator. By the time they were involved in their first skirmish, the TIE fighter pilots were already quite proficient. In hindsight, we see the TIE fighter as a blatant disregard for the safety of Imperial TIE fighter pilots. But surprisingly, most TIE fighter pilots completely embraced the design of their starship. Partly because the TIE fighters were extremely nimble and maneuverable, but also because the danger of the craft appealed to them. TIE fighter pilots belonged in an elite group. Even on the largest Star Destroyers, there were never more than a few dozen of these very elite pilots. They were always expected to be alert and perform to their fullest potential because of the very small margins of error their craft afforded to them. This made them really stand out compared to other pilots in the Empire, and they really enjoyed this elite status. Eventually, the lack of shields grew into something that the TIE fighter pilots would become proud of, despite it being a major design flaw in my opinion. The competitive spirit that Imperial cadets had only grew more when they became active service TIE fighter pilots. The Imperial Navy pilots known as Hedges also had a very serious feud with Imperial Army pilots known as Groundhogs. The Army pilots were tired of the Navy getting all the better funding and recognition, and the Imperial Navy pilots felt like they deserved it. Nonetheless, this inter-service rivalry kept the TIE fighter pilots quite sharp even during interwar periods. TIE fighter pilots had an odd mixture of self-assured confidence you would expect from any fighter pilot, along with a good dose of conformity and a sense of duty. The TIE fighter pilots were heavily indoctrinated just like the rest of the Imperial military, but because they were officers and they were in the Navy, they were given a bit more freedom than more dogmatic branches like the Stormtrooper Corps. Yet the Imperial Navy and TIE Fighter Corps was still full of true believers, fully dedicated to the Imperial mission of bringing peace and stability to the galaxy. This also meant that they were comfortable with putting the mission before their own safety and lives. Many measures were put in place to show that the Imperial pilots were just another cog in the machine. This included giving them numerical call signs instead of names. Also, TIE fighter pilots were never assigned to the same ship, so they could never get too attached to one ship. They also understood that helping a wingman was much less important than completing the mission at hand.
Command's directive and return to formation, instead of going after him, he'd be dead now.
No place for maverick heroics in his Emperor's Navy.
So the process of becoming an Imperial TIE fighter pilot was quite a lengthy one, and it usually started during one's childhood. The actual training took several years and was extremely competitive and rooted out all the weakest candidates. What was left was some of the most talented and ruthless pilots in the galaxy, far superior to their Rebel Alliance counterparts. The only problem was the Empire's approach to selecting starfighters was the exact opposite of the one they used for finding pilots. So guys, that's our analysis of the TIE fighter pilots. As you can see, they were amongst the most elite in the galaxy, yet they were placed in very subpar starfighters. Anyway guys, if you want to check out another military organization in Star Wars that was really well put together, check out our second channel, Generation Films, where we just went over the 10 advantages that the clone troopers had over other infantry units. So check that out, and also don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.